Welcome back from the Turkey weekend. Now, while people are walking in, I thought since Mary Claire showed you something from New Yorker, I had something to show you too that was that caught my eye here. This is fairly nice. Okay, it's well done. You got that? I'm not really giving a lecture on punctuation today, but this one is one of the now that shows a different medium of that people still use dictaphones. Has anyone seen a dictaphone in the last 5 years? I don't know, but now I also yes. Reporters use telephones. Oh, absolutely. Oh, I see. Especially in the when they're writing up these little bios. Okay, good. Now then, we had a trouble the other day about getting a good example of a dangling participle, and so I also have one of those here. Please, Eddie, get way down to the bottom. No, yeah, that's it, right here. Okay. I think this helps to understand. This helps to understand the principles of dangling participles as well as any example I've ever seen. Okay, now I have good news and bad news for people today, and actually I have several of each kind, so I'll alternate between the two. First of all, one piece of good news is that Mary Claire has agreed to speak also on Wednesday. Because there was much too much to say last Wednesday, and so we can get more detail between the lines of the latter parts of her handout that she gave us on Wednesday. So another piece of good news is the following Wednesday, a week from this Wednesday, Paul Halmush will be a guest speaker. I have finally got enough courage to ask him, and he was enthusiastic. So he will be. So I think this will be a fitting. A fitting way to have sort of a climax of the mathematical writers that happen to be around the Bay Area, and probably I don't know of any on the East Coast that I would rather have anyway. So. Okay, so Paul will be here a week from Wednesday. As I mentioned, a week from today, Rosalie Stemmer will be also lecturing. She is a copy editor at the Chronicle. And she's been reading your papers also. Now, next piece of good news is we do have your papers to return to you today, 2 sets of them, and Rosalie has another set which you'll probably get a week from today. But Mary Claire has gone through one set, and the TAs and I have gone through the others, and so today you'll be getting 3 sets of feedback on what you turned in, and then one more set coming next week. Now, in the bad news category, well, the content of these papers was not 100% pleasing to your instructor. I got to say something about what is it that makes makes a professor's life worthwhile, and sometimes when he what gives him some pleasures, and the answer is when he can see that he has succeeded in teaching something. It's usually a joy to read term papers at the end of a year or exams or something and say, I bet this student couldn't have done this if he hadn't learned what I taught this quarter. Now, I didn't have as much of that joy as I usually do when I read these drafts. I understand that they're drafts, but I had the feeling that most of them were written before September, or at least hadn't been looked at again, even since we started. Now, so I didn't have the feeling that, I had the feeling maybe we're putting on a great show up here in all this, and you can sit back and relax and say, oh yeah, that's groovy. But when it actually comes to doing it yourself, have you actually changed in one little bit anything that you've ever done before? Didn't see that much evidence of it, and so that was disturbing to me. For example, 11 papers out of 13 had which where there should have been that. Now that's one of the things I've been harping on for, several times. But 11 out of 13, and in every case they had at least 2 bad examples in the thing. Now maybe there's 2 other people, who learned something here or never misused which and that. Otherwise, I told you that I was an offender myself at the time of my Scientific American experience 10 years ago. And Charles Dickens uses it wrong all the time. I mean, let's face it. But in the 80s, in America, not yet so much in England, but in America in the 80s, people are getting very sensitized to this, and it's important to know the rule. And so 11 out of 13 is a fantastically statistically significant thing. I mean, if somebody gets 60% of the votes in an election, it's considered a landslide, and 11 out of 13 is way higher than that. So this means that you people don't know anything. So I decided that I have to resort to something desperate, and that is to give you a quiz. So for the next 5 minutes, would everyone, or at least raise your hand when you're done. So everybody take a piece of paper out, please, and write on it 2 sentences, one of the sentences uses the word that properly, where which would be a mistake, and the other sentence uses the word which properly, where that would be a mistake. Just write these 2 sentences and raise your hand when you think you've got it. If you can do it in 1 sentence, okay, but that might take you longer. I don't want to. So. Just get the sentences that show that you understand the rule. Honor code requires that I leave the room when you're taking an exam. Actually, I'm not grading this, so. Anyone who fails it has to write 100 times. Everybody's still writing? Yeah? Oh, you got some? Okay. Auditors don't count. It doesn't matter if you learn anything. TA's okay. Yeah, I know the TAs have been learning.
I think it's more of our regular. catch.
Did you pass one in, Aaron? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, now let's see. Is it necessary? Oh, it doesn't matter. Okay. Okay, this is okay. This is fine. So far I got one right. All right. The story which I told you is wrong. The story that I told you is correct. Which one of you is responsible for this chaos? Correct. Okay. Here we go. It was not that he would not speak, but rather that he could not speak. Oh, that's too obvious. I didn't define my which. Okay. This second one is the paragraph that is to follow sketches an algorithm of the simplex method. In which box shall we place our papers? Okay. The day that has white hair is my favorite. The dog that has white hair is my favorite. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Okay. The Declaration of Independence, which, as we all know, was signed in 1776, is a fine piece of expository writing. Now, yesterday, for the first time this quarter, I changed. I read a paper where I had to change that to which, and it was misused 6 times. I mean, he was saying the name of the first program is X. That the first program is called X. That does something, and it should have been which. But okay, so this is a good example. The Declaration of Independence. That, as we all know, that would be wrong. Okay. Now, the proof that I provided in this chapter is based on the fact that, okay, see the book which lies beside the desk. So here we have a bad one. It should be see the book that lies right beside the desk. But see the book which lies right beside the desk would have a comma in it, which would be a completely different meaning. So that one's wrong. I ate the cake that you gave me. I ate the cake, which was the stalest I had ever encountered. That was pretty good. Okay, it should have been turkey though. Okay, here's an of which. Okay, so there's different ways to use that, and there's different ways to use which. And the problem, the thing where they conflict is when we're I know which is which. Cheap shots, yes. Okay. The case that is important is it's like in the sentence I just used. I don't say the case which is important. I would say the case that is important. I'm clarifying which case it is. And if you go through the text editor and if you look at the preceding symbol, whatever precedes the word, almost always, 99% of the time, 97% of the time, you can tell if it's a wicked witch, if there is no comma preceding it, or no semicolon, or right parenthesis, or some dash, or some pausing phrase, then it should probably be that instead of which. If the thing preceding is a preposition, it's another case. And then there's these other exceptions that come up 3% of the time.
I've been told that I think it was Mary Claire, but I'm not sure. I've been told that people use which and that correctly when they talk. But
well, there is some saying that the rules are different when you talk than when in other words, we would say which in orally where it wouldn't be acceptable written. And some people say American. Is that right? Did I get that right? This one is fine, Diane. I hope this is a sentence that uses correct grammar.
okay,
I hope this is a sentence which uses correct. Yes.
Occurrences of which in natural speech are close to zero. What happens? The places where which starts to appear are where the speaker feels under pressure.
Oh.
Like
Like
giving
now.
a lecture to
Oh,
a course.
okay.
Suddenly people begin to exhibit an unnatural sort of diction, which is one of the things that's well, and if there's any doubt in your mind about whether I feel comfortable talking to an audience,
Fine.
that's one of the things that's especially disastrous about the which on paper, that it not only has there's a loss of grammatical information, it also conveys a tone that you definitely do not want to get across. And I can't conceal my nervousness face to face, but on paper I can fool you into thinking that I'm perfectly comfortable.
Yeah, but I think you also agree that the rule was not at all enforced until about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, very much. Otherwise, how can I account for the fact that all translations of the Bible have wicked witches in it all over the place?
The locus classicus is Fowler, 1926.
Yeah. Right, but nobody actually believed him until somebody finally figured out what he was saying about 1976. No, Julie?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the people who were writing professionally started enforcing it very much more in the late 70s and early 80s than at least I notice this in novels that I read that were written before and after this time, but especially, as I was saying, translations of the Bible that were written after that time and so on. Now the New English Bible, for example, they have the people in England who worked on that were supposed to be not only theological scholars, but they were also supposed to be writers, and they would edit it for style so that it would sound good from the pulpit and everything. And there's witches all over the place.
Oh, but English editors regard this as nonsense.
Okay. I thought Fowler was English.
Fowler is English, but he was not himself an editor, and English editors regard it as nonsense.
Oh, okay. So it's a matter of whether when the editors got into power. Then it's the okay. All right. That's good clarification. Here we are. The paper, which contains many wicked witches, is otherwise not too bad. Okay, I like that one. Okay, well, I guess you people might have learned something. No, but most of you have this stuff online, right? So you can just go through and look for all occurrences of witch in your paper and make sure that the final draft. You've got to give me one perk for teaching this course, and that I thought that something got through here. Okay. Okay. The terminal. Okay. Now, see, these are cheap ones again, as in the day says. Okay. All the students that know when to use which and that will pass the quiz. See, now these self-referential sentences are something that computer scientists think of right off the bat. It's a good psychological thing. Okay. Now, the next piece of good news, I got a letter from Leonard Gilman, who I sent the examples of your previous homework, and so he said, your letter made my day, and then some, and so on. It's quite a class you have. I'm still reeling in belief that I did not follow through my own precepts. Anyone can reel in disbelief. I can reel in belief too. All right. Also that I put in the condition alpha unequal beta. It wasn't there for the first 16 or so drafts, but some gremlin made me insert it in the final one. Here we have demons in Texas as well. So. Okay, so he encloses a new write-up of his own, which he was inspired by this, although I'm not sure he actually optimizes over our student B's solution. But anyway, he was inspired to do this, and so on. He tried out R instead of T for real numbers, and he says my primitive facilities still do not provide the accent in Sierpinski. And then he says. He's talking about some improvement in the mathematics that was suggested, but instead of saying an increasing sequence, an unbounded sequence is better. And he says he's planning to put in a new appendix in the next edition, which will be Stanfordized. So, and he's an emeritus professor as of 3 months ago. My goodness. It makes me drool to think of how much time he must have to revise that book. Now, so that was more in the good news category. So you know that your efforts on homework are going to actually get into print. Now, the rest of today, I wanted to talk about. Let's see. Oh yeah, one rule that I've never brought up, that nobody's mentioned in class before, that I noticed as I was grading the papers, is something that let's see if I could try to formulate it. I just found it violated in about 3 of the cases, and it was a rule I never even was aware of before. So. But now having seen that you're done wrong, all of a sudden I realize there's something to it, and that is, if you have a title of a subsection in your paper, and then you start going into the subsection, and these 3 people in their first sentence they referred back to the subsection as if it were an integral part of the text. They would use a pronoun that would refer back to the subsection, like a subsection might be. Auto-bounded whatever fundados, I don't know, and then the first sentence would say, "This is an interesting idea." Sort of referring to the subtitle as if it's part of the text that the text needs the subtitle in order to live. Now, in fact, the unwritten rule that I understand is that you always write the subtitle, the text. And restate in it anything that might have appeared in the subtitle, that the text would still make sense as a lecture being read to the person with the title removed, but the title was only there, sort of stuck in the margin or something as an annotation. But I think if you go through and you actually, when you see the title there, it sort of goes into one part of my head that says, oh yeah, now I'm seeing something in the structure of this document, but the other part of my head still wants to be told that I'm moving into that part of the structure. Is that basically clear what I just said? You understand the point? That when you're reading, you're given a list of problems that are NP complete, and you would have a title saying the traveling salesman problem. Another one would be the Hamiltonian path problem. Another one would be vertex cover problem, and so on. And these are all going to be examples. So now you have a different title, and so you get to a section called the traveling salesman problem, and now your first sentence should not say, and this is another derivation or this of NP complete or something like this. You would say, consider a traveling salesman that must visit different cities. But your text would not assume that the reader had read the subtitle and integrated that. I'm not sure I'm saying it properly because it's a rule I've never heard of before. But I noticed that it was misused several times, so that's a rule for those. Now, I want to go through some of the things that were of interest in a paper that I was asked to read by by two of our grad students during the summer. I didn't read it on time. They submitted it in August, and I didn't have a chance to give them their feedback until September, October. But anyway, as I was doing this, I was thinking, oh, I'm teaching a course in writing. I got lots of good examples in this, and I can show you. And Ramsey said he wouldn't mind if I showed you this draft, and so there he is grinning. And the comments that I made, most of them have already been covered, and I don't want to we've already had enough of review today for things we've already done in this class. But I did want to show you some things about technical writing that arose here that I think are general interest. And so this is a paper presenting a rather difficult result about graph theory, and in the beginning section here on preliminaries, there's definitions, and this is especially important in a paper on graph theory because graph theory has at least 4 different sets of conventions that different authors use. Some people say you have vertices and edges. Others say you have points and lines. And in this particular case, these, I think both Ramsey and Alex had learned graph theory from a textbook in which the author, when he used the word path, it always meant a simple path, where other authors would say a path was any sequence of any sequence going along the vertices along edges. Some people say it's a simple path if you never visit the same vertex twice, and others would say that they would call it a walk if it maybe visits a vertex twice, and they would call it a path if it doesn't. But those, I never had a textbook like that, and neither did almost anybody in the older generation. And this idea of distinguishing between a walk and a path is far from being a standard thing. So when you write a paper on graph theory, you have to realize that you're getting readers who from all different backgrounds, not the same as you, and it's going to be the same in other fields that are new. Terminology in mathematics takes a while to crystallize and become accepted. In fact, it's a very interesting thing. I think the equal sign. You'd say, was there ever a day when equal sign was not well known among mathematicians? But in fact, it took more than 100 years for the equal sign to catch on. Robert Record wrote a wonderful book about 1560 where it's called the whetstone of wit, and he said he will use this symbol, 2 parallel lines, in order to say that 2 things are equal, because nothing could be more equal than these lines, and so on. And he used it in his book, and it was a nice book. But he was British, and people in England and France didn't use it. They had this sign. They were using it for. There were a lot of competing. Some people used this for minus. Some Descartes used it for, what was it? Anyway, there was a lot of. It wasn't until more than 100 years later that the term for equal sign finally was adopted by people in more than one continent, and there were all kinds of opposition to it for a long time. People like I think Wallace finally won out, and with his algebra book about 100 years after, but Fermat would never use this sign. He would always say in Latin equal, AQ, and things like that. So it took a long time, and people who were writing books on mathematics would have to say at the beginning what an equal sign is in those days. Now we don't have to do that anymore, but you have to be aware of the things that are diverse among your readership and catch that. Now let's see, what do I do here? Simplify. Oh, okay. Well, it's not a great point here, but here he talks about a path, and he has and he's given a definition that took. This is one of the. These 3 lines are one part of a 4-part definition, definition 2.4, and has 4 parts to it. And this is by far the longest one. And the idea would be try to shorten it if you can, so that the definition is more easy to remember and doesn't look too formidable. And in this case, he's got a notation that he can use, that he would just say W1 with a right arrow and a plus sign over it, which means one or more steps. And then he has an arrow with an asterisk over it, which means 0 or more steps. And so here going W1 to W2 and then 0 or more steps to WK. Now you could simply say W1 and 1 or more steps to WK, because W2 does not appear anywhere in this definition. And so simple rule there, but when you look, the main idea is try to simplify something. Putting down extra information isn't always helpful. Sometimes saying more is saying less, communicating less. Now, consistency is the next thing. When you're making these definitions, especially when you have a paper with co-authors, it's useful to try to be consistent. And so you go through and you start out and you've got definitions that are sort of priming the pump for the rest of the paper. And so this has all these nice definitions. It talks about a dominator and an immediate dominator and so on. Nothing wrong with that, except that on the following pages they don't use the words anymore, but they call them parent and child. Now that would, that would seem obvious, but I'm in the chapter that I'm writing now on probability theory. I happen to notice that there are a whole bunch of definitions at the beginning of the chapter that look fine, but I realized by the time I get to the end of the chapter that I never really needed them, and there was no point in giving them there if I was never going to use them anywhere else in the book. It's something like the complaint that Feynman had about the way people were taught new mathematics. They would learn the definition of union and intersection of sets in 2nd grade, and then in 9th grade they would first apply it to something. Okay, now here's a sentence of a couple of mildly interesting things here. It says we're doing some references to the literature here, and it says Gabo and Tarjan show that for many algorithms that had such a multiplicative factor in their worst case complexities, the multiplicative term can be removed. And now I changed this to have. The algorithms had such a multiplicative factor in their worst case complexity, but they still have. But the problem, there's a difference between an algorithm for a problem and a class of all algorithms, and the class of all algorithms for the problem. The problem has a worst case complexity, but an algorithm is something that always lives. So for many problems whose best algorithms had a multiplicative factor, then that was something that's now different in the past, from the past to the present, because Gabo and Tarjan found a way to get a better algorithm. But when you're talking about present and past tense, the thing is, what an algorithm is timeless. Okay, now let's see. Question?
Yeah, I noticed that they're using abbreviations on the bibliographic entries there.
Yeah.
Did you say something about that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would put a space here. I don't like that. I don't like that running them right next to each other. I would put a tie there, probably. And so that's all the way through here. You see that should have a space, but I didn't comment on that. Now this is something that actually each journal has its own preferred bibliographic style, and so when you're dealing with preprints like this, anything they have in convenient. However, that raises a good point, because there were, on quite a few of the term papers, there were cases where I would where I suggested that it was better style to try to write, when you have a reference, that your sentence would still be a reasonable sentence without the reference. so that the reference would be really parenthetical and not part of the sentence. And so here's an example of breaking the rule. You see, experimental data in this paper here. So and this would, it would be better probably to say experimental data gathered by Lenstra, bracket Len 79, or whoever this Len is. I mean, Lenstra does an awful lot, so I was gambling on him. Lengauer. Okay. Experimental data gathered by Lengauer, and then bracket Len 79 suggests such a thing. Now, on the other hand, if there's it sometimes seems some people have some journals and books have the style that they're going to write out the author's name completely in full here, and a date, and in that case it seems pretty repetitious to see those names all over the place. You say you would say Knuth, and then it would say bracket Knuth 1983 does something like this, and so then you try to make it, if they're making the bibliographic reference some long drawn out thing, you try to write it in such a way that it reads reasonably well. 'Cause I remember my paper on go-to statements was originally in the ACM surveys, computing surveys, and then it was reprinted in another book where the editor in the other book had this other bibliographic style. So the ACM style was you just have a bracket and a number, but the book had this thing where you had to put a full name in there and a year, and I found that I had to make quite a few editorial changes in my sentences when I got to galley proofs, because because the thing just didn't look right anymore with this style. So there's no way to. So it does affect your writing a little bit. I think though it's a good idea to try to write it in a way that that you would avoid something like this, but that if you take out the reference, it would still make a good sentence. That's a fairly good principle.
I thought I'd just add a comment on why I think a lot of times the journals recommend that style where you have author and then a year. At least the Chicago Manual Style says they give it the primary reason for using that when you add something new to a bibliography, it doesn't change the whole text if you use numbers, for example.
Oh yeah, well,
but that reason disappears with the advent of.
That's right. No, Chicago Manual of Style has a lot of interesting rules that like about numbering of footnotes and things like that were done in order to save money because of the actual way things were printed at the time, and so they would recommend, for example, not numbering footnotes throughout a chapter instead of differently for each page and so on, because the particular composition system they were using found that a lot easier, and tech certainly finds it a lot easier too. Now so this is a way of giving a reference that you don't have to change it if all the numbers change at the last minute. Okay. Right, but somehow this gives a clue, but it's almost too much of a clue. I would rather rewrite the sentences so that it isn't.
Even in this case, if you add one more paper by the same person in the same year, you'll have to put in 1 and 2 after the name.
Yeah.
So you might still have to make changes in the paper.
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the point.
So after you write this paper, you want to put in one more reference.
Yeah.
It's also a paper by the same author in the same year.
Well, that's 79A, 79B, or something like that.
Right. So you have to you have to change your paper. You got to.
Oh. Yeah. Well, you still have to make a change. It doesn't solve all problems. Yeah. Okay. I get the idea. Now right here it says our so-and-so algorithm to recognize and label B-affordable graphs when given a directed graph, comma, G, comma, with distinguished vertex S, comma. I'm talking about the commas here. This was a long, long sentence, and so they must have realized by the time they got to this point that you needed a breath, and so put a comma in here, 2 of them right away there, you know. But the real place for the breath was up here, our algorithm and so on to recognize graphs, comma. That comma is good. Then you need one there, and then say when given a directed graph G with distinguished vertex S, comma can be summarized as follows. So then now the structure of the sentence is nicely set off by commas. You've got this thing in apposition here, but this no comma after graph G with distinguished vertex S. No, I don't see any point in it. That's in apposition just as well, but there's a sort of a it can go fast enough. You can say a graph G with distinguished vertex S, so you have to put a comma there too, and by that time you've got so much breath that you're really, you're hyperventilated. So, okay. Now, find all self loops. I decided why not say self loops instead of loops. And again, self loops is an unambiguous term in all the books on graph theory, but a loop, some people, I just go out of my way to be a little bit unambiguous when I first use a term. Was a suggestion there. Simplifying. Oh, here was an interesting thing, and it occurred throughout this paper. Where is it? Okay. First of all, here. They're given a procedure here, and it says if any hj, j greater than 0, has more than so-and-so vertices, edges, then stop now. It turned out that if you read this paper for content, you'll find out that h0 is already known to satisfy the condition. And so h0 doesn't have to really be checked for having more than a certain number of edges. But it does. But when you're giving the rule, you can still simplify the rule and forget this restriction. You don't have to give the most efficient procedure when you're giving the exposition. You just have to give the thing that's most efficient for communication. So I would just say here, if any hj has more than so-and-so edges, then stop now. Later on, you can optimize it and say, well, by the way, you don't have to check j equals 0. But there's no reason to state the rule more complicated at this point. But now here's the interesting, the most interesting thing about the paragraph. It says, G being BF orderable implies that all the HJs are BF orderable. Now the HJs, here we're talking about all the HJs. This means the set of all HJ for J equals 1 to whatever. And it's a concept that they need over and over again in the rest of the paper. So you could say, to make the plural of a symbol, the most common rule is to use apostrophe s for plurals of symbols. Then you get into trouble because he's going to have HJ primes also in the paper. So you could say just HJ. You could say all the H sub j are BF orderable. That's done. Or you could say each H sub j is BF orderable. But probably if you're going to use this, so many times in the paper, what you really need is another name for the concept. Just think, take out your thesaurus and say, it's going to be the auxiliary graph or something like this, and because this is not really an elegant thing to talk about each H sub j. It's very introverted towards symbols. Now let's see. Apostrophe. Here's where you want an apostrophe for sure. HJ's descendants, that's a possessive, that's genitive. We want to have an apostrophe s in that place. But you see how often these other places here of the HJs. It would be better to I think, to have somehow to have another name for that, to have another word for that. But you have to think of some way. This is jarring the way it reads. Now below versus above. Here's another case where a space is missing in between here, and I would rather have a space between there. 4.3 below and 4.4 below, he's making references in the middle of a proof to things that are proved later. Now, this is something that Hardy does a lot in his book on Introduction to Number Theory, and he has all the theorems numbered from 1 to 500 and something at the end, but they don't appear in the order of their proof. They just appear in the order of their statement. And so at every point, he'll say, and now we're ready to prove Theorem 8, and here we are in the middle of Chapter 25. And this is a little bit disconcerting. You wonder if somebody isn't making making a circular argument here, because maybe you've been proving something that bases on that. Well, still, it's sometimes helpful to have a look ahead as to what's going on. Another issue about a below versus above I'll have to get to another day. Here's a place for a hyphen. In a compound adjective, we can use the one vertex path. Now on the next page, what do they talk about? The a two-edged subpath. Okay, again, a good place for a hyphen. Two-edged subpath. Okay. Now I talked about ties a while back, where you're putting a little thing like if you're using tech, which they are, putting that an of and q would never, the break would never occur at the end of the line here, and there were quite a few of these things where you'd say occurs in q prime, and then here it says occurs in p. So this idea of ties, here's another case of ties. Sometimes the symbol wants to be tied to the letter after it. I wouldn't tie the if to the E2. I would tie the E2 to the is instead of the other way around. I would rather have a break before than after. As I said, it's not really as hard to do that as you might think at first. It comes natural. I think. Now, here it says we're talking about vertex of distance less than or equal d, and it seemed to me vertex at distance less than or equal d would sound a little more natural. But but that wasn't the main point I wanted to make here. It says see Figure 7 for a sketch. Now, somehow that's an example of what I call an unfortunate coincidence in writing, where you've got well, it's not so coincidental as some of the other ones. There's a better one. There's a better one in section 10 on page 10 here, where it says the V double prime vertices have been deleted by this point. Okay. Now, there's this idea of a coincidence where there's a word that's used in two different senses. All of a sudden, you're finding that there's a point there that's being so you can't use certain idioms of English in the wrong context where it's misleading. And one of the term papers was an interesting study of airplanes design, and he's also mapping things, conformal mapping in the complex plane. So he's got planes and planes. And they're both used in the same sentence, and you don't know which. The author knows which plane he's talking about, but it's not very clear. So you have to think of a way to avoid these. Now, so these are cases where it's not a matter of a typographic error, but it's a matter of really a coincidence. Now, I tried to find the book that I have that has a lot of these in it at home, but apparently my kids have lent it out to somebody else. But there are some. My favorite one in that whole book was Nixon to stand pat on tapes. And there was one in there where there's a picture of a lady in upstate New York who's leaning on this post in front of her house and is talking about how she's been elected chairman of the school board, and this is the third year in a row that she's held a similar post. And some of them, I must say, I break up so much I can't even tell you. Now, this happened also in your term papers in 3 or 4 cases. It's surprising that it does occur, and so you got to watch out. You got to be aware of these coincidences. Somebody, if the word left as opposed to right, is also there's left, which comes from leaving, and in the one case, so you say that something was left, but then if there's a right-left context, you have to be careful and so on. So looking for these oddball coincidences is a worthwhile thing to. Okay, now I think I've got about through my list. So yeah, let's see. No, a few more quick comments at the end. Here he had. The illustrations for this paper were particularly well done. It's an example of an algorithm, and it starts out with a sample graph that a person that makes the problem understandable that he's trying to solve, and then he builds on this by following the same topology, and you can see the way these vertices are lined up is consistent between all of the things, and so as the algorithm is doing these things, you can see them happening. Well, there was one problem here that actually was a mistake on this, but this is incorrect. But the main idea of all these figures was that it was very well done, and I suggested only that they add one more vertex. An edge from here to here, which would have illustrated a step in the algorithm that they didn't have illustrated otherwise. So I wanted to show you those because a sequence of examples that builds on each other is usually better than a sequence of examples that are all random and independent of each other, I think. Okay, so thank you. You can come and get your papers now.